The glass door of the emergency ward burst open as the night rain followed her inside. Elena almost slipped as she rushed forward, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, not from exhaustion alone, but from fear clawing at her chest. The smell of antiseptic, the harsh white lights, the distant beeping of monitors, it all blurred together as she clutched the folded hospital bill in her hand like it was a lifeline. Before we continue with the story, please like, share, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you are watching from. Please, she said to the receptionist, her voice trembling. I need to speak to the billing office. My brother, he can't be discharged until the payment is arranged. The woman barely looked up. Billing opens in the morning. Elena swallowed. He needs surgery tomorrow. If it's delayed. Morning, the receptionist repeated flatly. That was when the room seemed to change. The murmurs quieted. Nurses paused. Even the rain against the windows felt distant. Elena felt it before she saw him. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood near the corridor entrance, his presence commanding without effort. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable, eyes sharp and observant. He didn't belong to the chaos of the emergency ward, yet he stood there like he owned the place. Raphael Blackwood. She recognized him instantly, though she had only ever seen his face on screens and magazines. Billionaire investor. Tech mogul. One of the richest men in the country. A man whose name alone could bend rooms in his direction. And somehow, impossibly, his eyes were fixed on her. Elena looked away quickly, embarrassed by the tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it with the back of her hand, gathering herself. She didn't have time to stare at rich men. Her brother was fighting for his life. But Raphael didn't look away. He had come to the hospital to visit a board member, annoyed at the inconvenience, already planning his exit. Then he heard her voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just desperate. Something about it cut through the noise. He watched as she straightened her shoulders, even while her hands shook. He noticed the creases in her nurse's uniform, the exhaustion etched into her face, the quiet dignity in the way she refused to beg further when she was dismissed. She turned, clearly preparing to leave, when Raphael spoke. How much? The word landed between them like a dropped glass. Elena froze. She turned slowly. I'm sorry. Raphael stepped closer, his shoes silent against the floor. The bill. How much do you need? The receptionist suddenly found her voice. Sir, this is... I asked her, Raphael said calmly. Elena stared at him, disbelief and suspicion warring in her eyes. Why? Raphael hesitated. He wasn't sure himself. He only knew that walking away felt wrong. Because you're not asking for charity, he said. And because time matters. She let out a shaky laugh. You don't even know me. No, he agreed. But I know hospitals. And I know what delays cost. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Slowly, she unfolded it and held it out, almost embarrassed by the number printed there. Raphael glanced at it once. That can be handled tonight, he said. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. I can't accept that. You haven't yet, he replied evenly. I'm offering. She searched his face for mockery, pity, or some hidden cruelty. She found none. Just a man who looked tired. Lonely, even. I'm a nurse, she said softly. I work double shifts. I'll pay it back. Raphael studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good. She frowned. Good. Because I don't want repayment in money. The words sent a chill through her. Before she could respond, a nurse called Elena's name from down the hall. Your brother's vitals just stabilized. The surgeon is on standby. Relief nearly knocked her over. Raphael saw it happen, the way her knees almost buckled, the way she whispered thank you to no one in particular. Something unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Meet me tomorrow, he said, already reaching into his jacket for a card. If you still want to walk away, you can. He handed her the card. It was simple. No flashy logo. Just his name and a number. Raphael Blackwood. Elena stared at it like it might burn her skin. I don't make deals without clarity, she said. What do you want? His jaw tightened, just slightly. 6 months. Her breath caught. Of what? Stay with me, Raphael said, his voice controlled. Live in my house. Attend events with me. Be seen with me. Her eyes widened. You want a fake relationship? Call it what you like, he replied. I need stability. Appearances. And you need time to breathe. That's insane, she whispered. Is it? Raphael asked quietly. I pay the bills. Your brother gets care. You continue your work. After 6 months, we part ways. No obligations. Elena shook her head, her thoughts spinning. I'm not for sale. I'm not buying you, he said firmly. I'm asking for your presence. Silence stretched between them. Elena looked down the hallway where her brother lay fighting for tomorrow. She thought of the debts, the sleepless nights, the endless fear. Then she looked back at the man who had just rewritten her options with a sentence. I set rules, she said finally. Raphael nodded. So do I. They stood there, two strangers bound by desperation and control, neither of them realizing that 6 months would unravel everything they thought they were protecting. And as Elena watched him walk away, card clenched tightly in her hand, she had no idea that the man who believed he could dictate every emotion was about to lose control in ways money could never fix. If you're already feeling the tension, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because this story is only just beginning. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat beside her brother's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, listening to the machine's hum like quiet promises. Every few minutes, her fingers brushed the card in her pocket as if to confirm it was real. Raphael Blackwood. 6 months. The words replayed in her mind until dawn. By morning, her brother was wheeled into surgery, and Elena stood in the hallway, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the surgeon finally emerged with a tired smile and a nod, relief broke through her like a wave. She thanked him over and over, tears streaking freely now, uncaring who saw. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. A familiar, calm voice came through. I assume the surgery went well. Elena closed her eyes. It did. Thank you. I'll have my driver pick you up in an hour, Raphael said. We'll talk. No pressure. No signatures. You sound very sure, she replied. I'm prepared, he said simply. An hour later, a black sedan waited outside the hospital like a punctuation mark on her old life. Elena hugged her brother gently, whispered that she'd be back soon, and stepped outside. The car door opened before she reached it. Inside smelled faintly of leather and something expensive she couldn't name. As the car pulled away, Elena stared out the window, watching familiar streets blur into unfamiliar territory. Raphael's home was not the towering glass fortress she expected. It was expansive, yes, but understated stone walls, tall windows, quiet elegance. The kind of wealth that didn't need to shout. Raphael met her at the door. You came, he noted. I said I'd listen, Elena replied. He led her inside, past wide halls and carefully chosen art. They sat across from each other in a sunlit room that felt more like a retreat than a mansion. Before you say anything, Elena began, I need boundaries. Raphael leaned back slightly. Good. So do I. No intimacy, she said firmly. No touching for appearances. No controlling my job. And no surprises. His eyes flickered, just briefly. Agreed. In return, discretion, attendance at key events, and living here for consistency. And after 6 months, she pressed. You walk away, he said. With no debt. No obligation. She studied him. Why me? Raphael was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly honest. Because you looked at me like I was human. Not a wallet. Not a headline. Elena felt something shift inside her, unsettling and dangerous. She nodded slowly. I'll do it. The agreement was signed that afternoon. Simple. Clean. Almost cold. By evening, Elena found herself standing in a guest bedroom larger than her entire apartment. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. This wasn't real, she told herself. It was temporary. 6 months. Downstairs, Raphael stood alone in his study, staring at the signed contract. He felt no triumph, only a strange, tightening awareness that something irreversible had begun. The first public appearance came sooner than Elena expected. 3 days later, she stood beside Raphael at a charity gala, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Cameras flashed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Relax," Raphael murmured without looking at her. "Just breathe." She exhaled slowly. "Easy for you to say." His lips twitched. "You're doing well." Too well, she thought, as she felt his warmth, steady and grounding. It unsettled her. Over the next weeks, patterns formed. Breakfasts shared in silence. Evenings where Raphael worked late while Elena studied for her nursing exams. Occasional events where she wore borrowed elegance and smiled for strangers. He was respectful, distant, controlled. And yet, there were cracks. Like the night she came home exhausted from a double shift and found Raphael in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. "You okay?" she asked without thinking. He looked startled, as if he'd forgotten she existed. "Fine." She didn't push. She simply poured herself water and sat across from him. Minutes passed in silence. Then, unexpectedly, Raphael spoke. "My father died in a hospital like the one you work in." Elena looked up gently. "I'm sorry." He hated hospitals, Raphael continued. "Hated weakness." She nodded. "Most people do." Their eyes met. For the first time, something unguarded flickered between them. From that moment on, the lines blurred, not physically, but emotionally. Raphael began asking about her day. Elena noticed the way he listened, really listened. She found herself defending him when staff whispered, correcting headlines in her head. And Raphael, for all his control, began to lose something else. Sleep. Because every night, he lay awake wondering when the woman he hired had become the one presence that made the silence bearable. Neither of them noticed the shift until it was already too late. And if this story is pulling you in, stay with it, because the deal they thought they could manage is about to test every rule they set. The first argument came unexpectedly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse, quiet and honest. Elena returned home late one evening, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. She dropped her bag near the door and kicked off her shoes, only to find Raphael waiting in the living room, his jacket still on, his expression unreadable. "You missed dinner," he said. "I had an emergency shift," she replied, rubbing her temples. "A child came in with respiratory failure." "I had investors over," Raphael said. "They asked where you were." She looked up, irritation flashing. "I'm not on standby for your image." He stood slowly. "You agreed to attend key events." "I agreed to pretend," she shot back. "Not to abandon patients who need me." Silence thickened the room. Raphael exhaled sharply. "You could have called. You could have remembered I'm not an accessory," Elena said, her voice tight. The words landed harder than she intended. Raphael's jaw tightened, a familiar wall rising. "You're right," he said coldly. "You're not an accessory. You're an agreement." Regret flashed across his face too late. Elena's eyes stung. "Then maybe you should reread the fine print," she said quietly. "Because I'm still a person." She turned and walked away before he could respond. That night, Raphael sat alone, staring at the city lights, replaying her words. Agreement. Person. He had built his life on contracts and control, but none of that explained the hollow ache settling in his chest. The next morning, Elena expected distance. Instead, she found a note on the kitchen counter. "I was wrong. I forgot myself. It won't happen again. R." She stared at it for a long moment before folding it carefully and slipping it into her pocket. Things changed after that. Raphael stopped scheduling events without consulting her. He asked instead of assuming. Elena noticed, and slowly, her guard lowered. They began sharing meals intentionally. Talking. Laughing even. One night, during a storm much like the one that had brought them together, the power flickered out. Elena gasped as the lights died. Great. Raphael smiled faintly. Generator will kick in. Eventually. They sat in the dim glow of emergency lighting, the rain pounding against the windows. Why are you really doing this? Elena asked suddenly. Raphael glanced at her. Doing what? This, she said, gesturing between them. You could hire anyone. He considered the question carefully. Because you don't need me, he said finally. And that's rare. Elena looked down. Everyone needs something. Yes, he agreed softly. But you still choose to care. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. As weeks passed, the pretense began to feel dangerously real. The way Raphael's hand hovered near her back in crowds. The way Elena noticed his moods before he spoke. Then came the night everything tipped. They attended a charity auction in the city. Elena wore a simple blue dress, elegant without effort. Raphael couldn't stop looking at her. Halfway through the evening, a woman approached them, her smile sharp. Raphael, she said smoothly. It's been a while. Elise, he replied, polite but distant. She turned her gaze to Elena, assessing. And you must be the new arrangement. Elena stiffened. I'm his partner, Elena said calmly. Elise laughed softly. For now. Raphael's hand tightened on Elena's arm. That's enough. But the damage was done. On the drive home, silence pressed in. She meant nothing, Raphael said finally. I didn't ask, Elena replied. He glanced at her surprised. You're not upset? She met his eyes. I am. But not because of her. Because I realized something tonight. His heart pounded. What? That this isn't pretend anymore, she said. And that scares me. Raphael swallowed hard. It scares me too. The car pulled into the driveway, neither of them moving to get out. If this ends badly, Elena whispered, it won't be because of the contract. Raphael nodded. It'll be because I didn't know how to stop protecting myself. Their eyes held, the space between them charged with everything they were still refusing to name. And somewhere deep inside Raphael Blackwood, control began to slip, not in chaos, but in surrender. Elena didn't speak for the rest of the ride. Raphael noticed the way her fingers twisted together in her lap, the way she stared out the window as if the city might offer answers he couldn't. When the car stopped, she opened the door without waiting for him and stepped into the cool night air. Elena, he called softly. She paused but didn't turn around. I need space tonight. He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I understand. She went upstairs, closing her bedroom door gently behind her, and Raphael remained in the car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. Losing control had always meant chaos to him. Markets crashing. Deals collapsing. People betraying him. This felt worse. Inside her room, Elena leaned against the door, heart racing. She pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to calm herself. She had agreed to 6 months. She had not agreed to care. And yet, here she was, feeling a sharp ache at the thought of walking away when the contract ended. The next morning, Elena woke early and went for a run, needing the rhythm of movement to quiet her thoughts. When she returned, sweat-soaked and breathless, she found Raphael in the kitchen again. But this time, he was cooking. She stopped short. You cook. He glanced up, a faint hint of embarrassment crossing his face. I'm trying. She smiled despite herself. Trying what? To be normal, he said honestly. They ate together in a fragile truce, the conversation light, careful. But something had shifted. The unspoken tension lingered, heavy and unresolved. Days later, the breaking point arrived from an unexpected direction. Elena was halfway through a shift when her supervisor pulled her aside. There's been a complaint. Elena frowned. About what? About you, the supervisor said hesitantly. Someone reported a conflict of interest. Said you're involved with a high-profile donor. Elena's stomach dropped. That's not. I know, the supervisor said quickly. But the board is asking questions. That evening, Elena came home furious. You told me this wouldn't affect my job, she said, dropping her bag hard onto the table. I didn't tell anyone, Raphael said immediately. I swear. I believe you, she replied, voice shaking. But this is what I was afraid of. Your world swallowing mine. Raphael stepped closer. Let me fix it. No, Elena said firmly. You don't fix this with money. He stopped. Then tell me how. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw uncertainty etched into his features. The billionaire who controlled everything was asking her for guidance. I need you to trust me, she said. And I need to know that if this ends, I won't be left with nothing. Raphael nodded slowly. Then don't let it end like that. The words hung between them, dangerous and hopeful all at once. That night, Raphael made a decision he had never made in his life. He rewrote the contract. When he handed it to Elena the next day, her hands trembled as she read. You're releasing me, she whispered. I'm giving you freedom, he said. Stay because you want to, not because you have to. Her eyes filled with tears. Raphael, why? Because somewhere along the way, he admitted quietly, I stopped wanting control and started wanting you. Elena looked up at him, her heart pounding. She saw the risk in his eyes, the vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to witness. She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was real. Raphael closed his eyes, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. And in that moment, both of them understood that love hadn't entered through a contract or a deal, but through the courage to let go. The clinic was quieter than the hospital, but the silence cut deeper. Elena moved through her shifts with practiced calm, her hands steady, her voice gentle with patients who didn't know they were being cared for by someone holding herself together with sheer will. She smiled when required. She listened. She healed. At night, she went home to a small apartment that smelled faintly of disinfectant and instant coffee. She slept on one side of the bed, always the same side, as if leaving space for a ghost. She told herself it was necessary, that walking away had been the kindest thing she could do. But kindness, she was learning, could still hurt. Across the city, Raphael's world shrank in a way no financial report could quantify. The press eventually moved on. Markets stabilized. His company survived. On paper, everything was fine. Inside, nothing was. He sat through meetings without hearing them, signed documents without reading past the first page. He stopped attending galas altogether. The house staff learned not to ask questions when he skipped meals or stayed in his study until dawn. Control had returned. So had loneliness. One night, Raphael stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee machine Elena had teased him about. He hadn't touched it since she left. He reached out, pressed the button, and watched the dark liquid pour into the cup. It tasted bitter. Sir? Raphael turned to find his assistant standing hesitantly in the doorway. There's something you should see. Minutes later, Raphael stared at the screen in disbelief. Elena was on the local news. The headline read, Nurse saves child during clinic fire. The footage showed smoke pouring from a small building. Paramedics rushing in. And then Elena, hair pulled back, face streaked with soot, carrying a coughing child out of the chaos. Raphael's chest tightened painfully. The reporter's voice continued. Witnesses say Nurse Elena Morales re-entered the building twice to make sure no patients were left behind. Raphael turned off the screen. She was still who she'd always been. Brave. Selfless. Choosing others even when it cost her. And he had let her walk away. That night, Raphael did something he hadn't done in months. He went to see her. Elena was locking up the clinic when she heard footsteps behind her. Excuse me. She turned. For a second, she thought she was imagining him. Raphael stood a few feet away, no suit, no driver in sight. Just him. Tired. Unguarded. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. I know, he replied. But I couldn't stay away. Her heart raced, anger and relief colliding. Why no? He swallowed. Because I watched you run into a fire today. And I realized I've been hiding from one. Silence stretched between them. I didn't leave to punish you, Elena said finally. I left because I didn't trust myself to stay without losing who I am. I know, Raphael said. And I hated myself for letting you think you had to choose. She crossed her arms. You still live in a world that consumes people. So do you, he said quietly. But you don't let it change you. That's what I fell in love with. Her breath caught. I'm not asking you to come back, Raphael continued. I'm asking if you'll let me meet you where you are. Elena studied him, searching for the man who had once tried to control everything. What she saw instead was someone willing to risk being refused. I can't be your escape, she said. I don't want an escape, he replied. I want a partner. Tears welled in her eyes despite her resolve. What happens when your world demands something I can't give? Then I choose you, Raphael said simply. And live with the consequences. They stood there, the city humming around them, the past pressing in. Elena took a step closer. Then another. This doesn't fix everything, she whispered. I know, he said. But it's a start. She reached for his hand, tentative, real. And for the first time since losing control, Raphael felt like he was finally choosing it. Elena didn't invite him inside that night. Not because she didn't want to, but because she needed to be sure this wasn't another moment powered by emotion alone. I need time, she said, her fingers still loosely wrapped around his hand. Not distance. Time. Raphael nodded immediately. You can have all of it. He meant it. They began again slowly. Coffee on neutral ground. Walks that didn't end in promises. Conversations that dug deeper than comfort. Raphael listened more than he spoke, learning the rhythm of Elena's life without trying to rearrange it. And Elena watched him carefully. She noticed the changes. How he no longer checked his phone every minute. How he laughed more easily. How he asked about her patients by name and remembered the details. How he volunteered, quietly funding emergency equipment for clinics without attaching his name. One evening, weeks later, Elena found herself standing outside his house again. Not as part of a deal. Not as a symbol. As herself. Raphael opened the door, surprise flashing across his face before relief softened it. You came. I did, she said. But this time, I don't want to hide. Neither do I, he replied. They didn't rush. They sat across from each other, the space between them charged with everything they'd endured. I won't move in, Elena said. Not yet. I wouldn't ask, Raphael said. And I won't stop working, she continued. No matter what the world says. I'd be disappointed if you did, he replied. She searched his face. And if this becomes too much? Then we talk, Raphael said. No contracts. No ultimatums. She exhaled slowly. That's new for you. He smiled faintly. I'm learning. The months that followed tested them in quieter, but deeper ways. A business downturn forced Raphael to make painful decisions. Elena watched him struggle with guilt instead of burying it under control. When he doubted himself, she reminded him that leadership wasn't about dominance, it was about responsibility. When Elena lost a patient, she came to him shattered. Raphael didn't try to fix it. He just held her while she cried, understanding at last that presence mattered more than solutions. The world continued to watch them. Some praised the transformation. Others doubted its sincerity. Raphael stopped caring. One afternoon, 6 months to the day since their original agreement would have ended, Raphael stood beside Elena outside the clinic. Do you know what today is? He asked. She smiled softly. The end of something that never should have started that way. And the beginning of something that only works this way, he replied. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Elena raised an eyebrow. If this is a ring. It's not, he said quickly, smiling. It's a letter. She opened it and read silently, her expression shifting with every line. It's a trust, she said, stunned. For healthcare workers. Clinics. Emergency care. In your name, Raphael said. But only if you want it. Her voice shook. Why? Because love didn't change me, he said. You did. Tears spilled freely now. She stepped into his arms, holding him tightly. This isn't control, she whispered. This is choice. Yes, Raphael said, his voice thick. And I choose you. Months later, the headlines returned, but this time, They told a different story. Billionaire steps back to support healthcare initiatives. Former fake romance becomes real partnership. Elena still worked long shifts. Raphael still ran an empire. But they met each other in the middle. Not as savior and saved. Not as buyer and agreement. But as two people who learned that love isn't about losing control, it's about trusting someone else with it. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful love stories begin with the courage to let go. The calm didn't last. It never did in Raphael Blackwood's world. 3 weeks after Elena returned to his life on her terms, Raphael walked into his boardroom to find every seat filled and every face tense. No greetings. No pleasantries. This was not a meeting. This was a reckoning. One of the senior board members leaned forward. "We need to talk about your priorities." Raphael loosened his cufflinks slowly. "Then talk." "You've delayed the Orion merger twice," another said. "You stepped back from international expansion. And now there are rumors you're planning to divert personal capital into healthcare initiatives." Raphael didn't deny it. "Those aren't rumors," he said evenly. "They're decisions." Murmurs rippled through the room. "This company was built on precision," the chairman said. "Not sentiment." Raphael's jaw tightened. "This company was built on people." "I forgot that once." "I won't again." A silence followed. Heavy. Dangerous. "You're risking shareholder confidence," the chairman warned. Raphael met his gaze without blinking. "Then I'll carry that risk." When the meeting ended, Raphael knew what he had done. He had crossed an invisible line. That evening, Elena sensed it immediately. "You look like you're bracing for impact," she said as he set his keys down. Raphael exhaled slowly. "I might lose the board." Elena didn't panic. She didn't lecture. She simply asked, "And how do you feel about that?" He paused. "Terrified." "Relieved." "Both." She nodded. "Then you're doing something honest." Weeks later, the fallout began. A major investor pulled out publicly. Headlines followed. Blackwood Empire shows cracks. Is love costing Raphael Blackwood his edge? Elena saw the articles during her break and closed her phone quietly. She didn't bring them up that night. She waited. Raphael eventually did. "They're right," he said one evening, staring at the city lights. "I am changing." Elena stepped beside him. "So am I." He turned to her. "Do you regret coming back?" She shook her head without hesitation. "No." "Do you?" He smiled sadly. "Ask me again if everything falls apart." That test came sooner than either of them expected. One morning, Raphael received the call that confirmed it. The board had voted. He was being forced into a temporary step back as CEO for stability. Not removed, but sidelined. Raphael ended the call and sat in silence. Hours passed before Elena came home from her shift and found him still there, unmoving. She knelt in front of him. "Talk to me." "They took it," he said quietly. "The one thing I built." Elena rested her forehead against his knee. "You're still here." "That doesn't feel like enough right now," he admitted. She squeezed his hand. "Then let me help you remember who you are without it." The weeks that followed were the hardest of Raphael's life. Without constant meetings and travel, the silence returned, but this time, he didn't face it alone. He went with Elena to the clinic, helped organize supply drives, sat quietly in waiting rooms, listened to stories that didn't involve power or profit. One afternoon, a patient thanked him without knowing his name. "You're kind," the woman said simply. Raphael felt something shift. Not pride. Peace. Meanwhile, Elena faced her own trial. A position opened at a prestigious hospital, one she dreamed of for years. The offer came with conditions. Discretion. Distance. Less media attention. Less Raphael. She stared at the email long after her shift ended. That night, she told him. "This is your chance," Raphael said immediately. "You should take it." Elena searched his face. "You don't even know what it costs." "I do," he replied softly. "And I won't be the reason you shrink." Tears welled in her eyes. "What if this pulls us apart?" "Then we'll face that truth," Raphael said. "Together or not." The honesty hurt more than any demand ever could. Days passed before Elena made her decision. She declined the offer. Not for him, but for herself. She realized she didn't want prestige if it meant silence. She wanted impact, presence, purpose. When she told Raphael, he didn't celebrate. He held her and whispered, "Thank you for choosing yourself." The final turning point came quietly. 6 months after the board sidelined him, Raphael was invited to speak, not as a CEO, but as a donor at the opening of a new community health center. Elena stood in the back, watching him step onto the small stage. No cameras. No investors. Just people. "I once believed control was strength," Raphael said. "I was wrong. Strength is choosing what matters, even when it costs you." He glanced at Elena. "And sometimes, what matters most isn't what you build, but who you become." Applause filled the room. Later that night, Raphael took Elena's hand. "I don't want my old life back," he said. "I want a new one. With you. Fully." She smiled through tears. "Then stop asking for permission." He laughed softly. Months later, the board reinstated him, not because of pressure, but because the company had stabilized without fear-driven leadership. Raphael returned on his terms. Balanced. Changed. Years later, people would say the empire survived because Raphael lost control. But Elena knew the truth. He didn't lose it. He gave it up. And found love where power never lived. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about wealth, but about the courage to change. The proposal didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence. One quiet evening, nearly a year after the night Elena had first walked back into Raphael's life on her own terms, they sat on the balcony watching the city breathe below them. No phones. No schedules. Just the hum of distant traffic and the warmth of shared stillness. Raphael broke the silence first. "Do you ever think about how this started?" he asked. Elena smiled faintly. "All the time. It still feels unreal." "I hired you because I thought control would protect me," he said. "I thought 6 months was something I could manage." "And now?" she asked. "And now I know control was the thing keeping me lonely." She turned toward him, studying his face. He looked older than the man she'd first met, softer, too. Not worn down, but worn open. "Elena," Raphael said quietly, "I won't ask you to stay because it feels safe. I won't ask you because it makes sense on paper. And I won't ask you because I'm afraid to lose you." She held her breath. "I'm asking because I choose you," he continued. "Every day. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's hard." He didn't kneel. He didn't rush. He simply held out a small velvet box and waited. Elena stared at it, then at him, tears already blurring her vision. "You're not trying to lock me into anything?" she asked, voice shaking. Raphael smiled. "I learned my lesson." She laughed through tears and reached for his hands instead of the box. "Yes," she said. "But only if we keep choosing each other. No matter how many times life tries to pull us apart." He nodded. "That's the only kind of yes I want." They opened the box together. The ring was simple, elegant, unpretentious, perfect. The wedding wasn't a spectacle. No press, no grand venue. Just a small garden, close friends, and Elena's brother, healthy, smiling, alive, walking her down the aisle. When Raphael saw her, the world narrowed to a single truth. This woman had undone him. And rebuilt him. Years later, people would still argue about Raphael Blackwood's transformation. Analysts would debate whether love had softened him or sharpened him. Biographers would speculate about the nurse who changed a billionaire's life. But Elena knew the real story. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It wasn't even about romance. It was about two people who stopped hiding behind what they could control and started trusting what they couldn't. And if you stayed till the end of this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next story might just remind you that the most powerful deals in life are the ones written by the heart. Red Heart.